I was 18, wide-eyed and barefoot in Abilene, writing letters that smelled like rain and believing every word he sent could build a forever. Mark was 23, older, charming, a man whose voice made the distance between Texas and Arizona feel like nothing at all when the night hummed. We lived through envelopes and midnight phone calls that crackled with promises, and I swore love was enough to make the world small and safe. When I moved to Denver chasing college dreams, he said I should stay with his parents, that it would help us save and stay close until we could marry. His mother's smile cut like glass under sunlight, and I learned that kindness can have claws hidden behind the sweetest tone of voice. She called me country girl, mocked my accent, and once gave me the wrong address on purpose so I'd end up lost in the dark, shaking, in a strange neighborhood. A bus driver pitied me, drove me back to safety, and I realized that sometimes the real danger wears perfume and pearls inside your own home. When I finally moved out, the air felt new and clean, but love had already planted something heavy inside me that I couldn't name. He came to visit one night, drunk and muddy, begging for forgiveness I didn't know was needed, and I told myself this was just how men were. That night, he slept on my couch, and I swear I heard the sound of something holy breaking inside my chest. In San Jose, I tried to become someone new, a girl with cameras, not case files, chasing beauty instead of law and memorizing the light on women's faces. He said he was proud, that he loved how passionate I was, but soon he started saying which projects were worth my time and which weren't womanly enough. I thought love was compromise until I realized compromise was just a prettier word for disappearing, and I was slowly fading from my own story. He drank more and more, hid my shoes, told me ghosts liked to play with me, and I started to believe my sanity could be haunted too. When he called a pastor to bless the house, I cried through the prayers, wondering if the devil was in the walls or in the man standing beside me. He said my hair looked better darker, my clothes too loud, my laugh too much, so I dimmed myself down until even my shadow looked tired. The first time he hit me, the world didn't end. It just stopped for a second, and when it started again, everything was quieter, colder, smaller. He said it never happened, that I was crazy, that my back hurt because I fell, and I almost believed him because fear can sound a lot like reason. My friend Grace saw it all, the fist, the sound, the mark, and she whispered, "You have to go." But I didn't move. Not yet. Not then. Instead, I prayed, hoping God could see me even when I couldn't see myself in the mirror anymore. He was a man of God on Sundays, a man of violence on Mondays, and I never knew which version would walk through our front door. In church, he held my hand like proof of redemption, but at home, he held silence like a weapon, and I learned to speak with my eyes instead of words. He told me my purpose was to be still, to serve, to follow, and I kept shrinking until I fit perfectly inside his small, cruel definition of love. His mother kept visiting, hiding my clothes, stealing little things, whispering that I was ungrateful and crazy, and her son watched like it was theater. I started locking my suitcase, not because I planned to run, but because I wanted to protect the tiny pieces of myself that were left. When I gained weight, he said I was ugly. When I lost it, he said I looked sick, every version of me somehow wrong in his eyes. He said no real wife should work, that my business was shameful, that independence made women disobedient, and I burned my dreams quietly for peace. Each time I tried to rise, he found a way to make me smaller, and when I smiled again, he asked if I'd taken my pills, like joy was a symptom. I remember one night I told him I was scared, and he smiled, said the fear made me beautiful, and I realized cruelty could sound like love if spoken softly. Panic attacks followed me to sleep, and when I woke, I couldn't tell if my shaking came from my body or from the walls of our house. My little sister Sophia came to live with us, young, hopeful, still believing people meant what they said, and I thought maybe she would bring peace to our home. He said it was good to have her there, said he felt better knowing someone would keep me company when he was away, and I believed him like a fool. We built her a room with lavender curtains, shared dinners, laughter. For a while, it almost felt like family, like safety, like redemption. But then, I saw how he looked at her sometimes, how his voice changed around her, soft but sharp, and something dark started growing in my stomach. The night I asked him if he was interested in her, my voice cracked, and he stared at me like I'd just confessed a crime. He screamed that I was sick, delusional, a liar, that I had insulted a man of God, that my depression had twisted my soul. I cried, begged for truth, begged for anything real, but he only said, "You disgust me," and packed his things like erasing me was holy work. My therapist said it was the pattern: control, shame, silence, repeat, and I started to wonder if survival could ever feel like freedom. That night, when he left, I sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by broken plates and broken promises, and for the first time, I didn't pray. I just whispered to myself, "I am still here," and for one fragile heartbeat, that was enough. He stuffed my dresses and photographs into black trash bags, as if my memories were litter, as if the life I built could be tied and dragged to the curb without witnesses or grace. He said his parents were coming and I would not be allowed back inside, and the echo in our hallway sounded like a small funeral that no one had the courage to name yet. I called my therapist from the bathroom with the fan on high, whispering that the house felt carnivorous, and the silence tasted like metal at the back of my tongue. When I opened the door, he switched from venom to honey, pleading and threatening inside the same breath, and I realized danger can dress itself as devotion with terrifying skill. Neighbors with a dog became lanterns in the corridor, and I ran with the car keys singing in my fist, promising I would never again barter my pulse for his peace. At a borrowed couch, I shook until dawn, counted my breaths like rosary beads, and remembered the first time my mother taught me to run without looking back. He called to choreograph fear, told me to watch both sides of the street when pushing the stroller, and every syllable was a bruise he wanted to place on the future. But courage is a weed between concrete slabs, stubborn and ordinary, and in that ordinariness I found a door I had never noticed, because kneeling blocks your vision. I worked 3 jobs and stitched a new calendar, pouring coffee at sunrise, translating grief in hospital corridors, and catching light with my camera when afternoon softened. Then Daniel appeared with verbs that did not hurt, and with his steady hands my lungs remembered wide, and with his steady love, my daughter Lily bloomed like morning itself. The divorce papers trembled like small birds in the hands of a clerk, while my past hissed in the corridor, throwing tantrums because signatures are exit wounds, and he feared bleeding. Daniel stood beside me like weather I could trust, and the judge's stamp sounded like a door locking from the inside to keep me safe in a house I had yet to move into. I did not celebrate with champagne. I celebrated with breath, with a shower that lasted too long, with music playing in a kitchen that did not know any of his footsteps. Grief still visited like a relative who overstays, but I fed it tea and boundaries, and asked it to leave its shoes at the door before walking on the clean floor of my next chapter. When the envelope arrived, final, official, irreversible, I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "I will not apologize for saving the only life I can legally and spiritually claim." He kept calling from shadows I refused to water, recasting himself as a saint with a broken halo, but I had already learned the language of unanswering, and it tasted like freedom. I bought a second-hand dresser and filled it with clothes that fit this new ribcage, a ribcage that had stopped flinching at keys and locks and footsteps in midnight hallways. To celebrate, I took Lily to the park and counted the crows on the wire and let the breeze comb our hair, and believed the sky when it said I was allowed to be unafraid. In a journal the color of mercy I wrote, "Today I laughed out loud in the produce aisle, and nobody told me to hush, and the apples didn't roll away from the sound." I went to sleep without negotiating with shadows, and the dark felt like velvet instead of teeth, and I dreamed of a front door that opened only to love. Sophia's phone turned into a black moon that refused to glow, and every message I sent orbited without landing until I feared my love had lost its gravity. When she finally answered, she said he was like a father, that debts and favors had braided between them, and the floor under me tilted like a ship I didn't know I'd boarded. An aunt with a mouth of ringing bells said they had been together. Not an accident, not a stumble, but a hallway of choices lit with my absence and her need. Sophia chose him the way a mirror chooses the face in front of it, and I learned betrayal can share your birthday and your laugh and still call itself love with practiced ease. My hands shook, but bone by bone I stayed intact, because this time I had a spine stitched with names. My own, my daughter's, the women who texted me at midnight to keep me from drowning. Judith's lessons in vanishing made sense in retrospect. The stolen hats and petty thefts were breadcrumbs leading toward the story she wanted, and I refused to be her dinner. I wrote boundaries like laws across my skin. Not my key, not my couch, not my secrets. And the ink did not wash off even when old grief reigned. With my therapist, I turned the chaos into a map, marked the traps with red flags, marked the safe houses with stars, and promised the girl I had been that I would walk smarter. Not madness, pattern, not curse, choice, not fate, practice. I repeated until the words fit in my mouth the way forgiveness might fit one day if it ever arrives wearing truth. I did not forgive them to make anyone comfortable. I forgave enough to stop carrying their stones, and I set the rest down where they could not reach my sleeping child. He tried to rename the past like a failed historian, but the dates were in my bones, and the bruises kept records that did not blur under his revisions and staged tears. I learned that survival writes in capital letters across your nervous system, and while fear once held the pen, now resilience took the seat and corrected the spelling. Sophia's silence became a museum I no longer visited, and guilt stopped sending invitations that smelled like sorrow and looked like obligation in my Sunday best. I loved the sister I had known and let go of the woman I could not reach, and both actions were holy, and both required altars, and both demanded daylight. Then I closed that chapter not with a slam, but with a latch, the gentle click of self-respect, the sound you only hear when your own heart finally speaks loudly. I mailed the last box of things she wanted and kept a photograph of us as children, not to punish myself, but to honor a beginning that deserved a kinder middle. At dinner, I told Lily that families are made of choices and care, not just blood and birthdays, and she nodded with the solemn wisdom of small queens. Daniel squeezed my hand like punctuation, the kind that finishes a hard paragraph and lets the next one start with air and better verbs and sunlight on the kitchen table. I slept without dreaming of locked rooms, and morning arrived wearing ordinary clothes, carrying coffee and a list of groceries, which is to say, carrying life. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back did not apologize for existing, and the mirror, at last, apologized to me. Portland rain threaded silver through my days, and my nervous system, once a feral animal, curled carefully into the quiet and called it shelter instead of cage. Daniel asked what I wanted and waited for the answer, and the waiting healed me because no one had ever paused long enough to hear the whole river before. I picked up my camera and pointed it at women with storms inside, and together we learned how to pose like survival, how to look at the lens without asking permission. Art became prayer that answered back, a cathedral of soft directives. Lift your chin, unclench your jaw, remember that your bones are older than his cruelty. Each shutter click pressed flowers between pages, preserved a season where healing arrived late but stayed for good, paying rent and watering plants. At night, Lily's breath kept time like a metronome that belonged to nobody's anger, and the rhythm taught my heart to beat for the life I chose on purpose. I wrote pages of small victories. Today I sang in traffic. Today I wore red without flinching. Today I filled the whole doorway and did not apologize for taking up space. Sometimes fear still knocked with familiar knuckles, but I answered with boundaries, and she left barefoot and embarrassed, carrying the shoes she once stole from me. I forgave my body for surviving by shrinking, for hiding under sweaters and inside cupboards of silence, and it forgave me for believing I was safer when invisible. We ate peaches over the sink and let the juice run down our wrists, a sticky sacrament for girls who learned too early to clean up their joy. On hard afternoons, I wanted to call the past, just to hear it ring without picking up, to remind myself I could let things make noise without letting them in. Daniel learned my quiets, and I learned his gentleness, and in the trading, we built a grammar where no sentence ended with fear, and no clause excused harm. I bought running shoes, and did not hide them, left them by the door like an announcement. This house will never again lie about where my feet get to go. Money in my account became a language of safety, and I spoke it fluently, paying bills on time, buying groceries without permission slips disguised as love. One evening I danced in the kitchen to a song I used to skip because it hurt, and this time it didn't, and I knew the scar had finally closed. I taught workshops for women who arrive carrying broken frames, and I told them the trick is not to forget. It is to remember without reopening the wound. We practiced saying no until it tasted like water, practiced saying yes until it tasted like summer, and watched each other grow into rooms that fit. When nightmares came, they found the locks changed and my name etched into the doorframe, proof that this address belongs to a woman who will not be moved by threat. I pressed my ear to the future and heard nothing dramatic, only dishes clinking and homework questions and laughter that doesn't check the clock for safety. I realized peace is not quiet. Peace is a choir that knows when to be loud, and I joined with my whole throat. In a Seattle community room with bad coffee and good chairs, I stood up and told the truth with both hands, because some stories need the body to testify. I said I left when I finally knew who I was, and the sentence tasted like bread fresh from an oven I built with my own patience and 1,000 small flames. I told them money is a spare key, and education is a map, and that love which demands your disappearance is not love, but weather that wants to drown you. They nodded with soft eyes and sharp spines, and we became a circle of lighthouses, each of us swearing to keep the other from going dark when storms arrive. When the meeting ended, I carried home a bouquet of names, women who promised to text me at midnight if the past tried to pick their locks again. Daniel waited outside with Lily's crayons and an open car door, and the ordinariness of it all nearly brought me to my knees with relief and awe. We drove past the river like an old scar turned silver, and the sunset did not ask me to forgive anyone. It only asked me to keep living like I meant it. At home, 5 kids argued about noodles and music, and the noise was a blessing that drowned every echo of rooms where I learned to whisper to survive. Dinner burned at the edges, and we laughed anyway, and I realized joy does not require perfection, only presence, and I was finally there for my own life. Later, I tucked Lily in and promised her that love is a place where shoes stay exactly where you leave them, because nobody needs to lie about the floor. Back in my studio, I set the tripod, faced the lens, and refused to tilt my head in apology, because my symmetry belongs to me no matter who misread it. I pressed the shutter and captured a woman centered in her own bright house, shoulders unbowed, mouth honest, eyes that know the cost and choose the value anyway. I titled the portrait What I Chose Next, printed it large, and let it take up the wall the way my life now takes up rooms that used to reject my breathing. I signed my name with the steadiness of someone who has outlived the version of herself that thought endurance was the same as love and pain was proof of devotion. When I turned off the lights, nothing moved or hid or lied, and the dark felt like velvet again, and I slept all the way to morning without bargaining. I wake now without rehearsing fear, make coffee in a kitchen that forgives burnt toast, and plan a future with errands and birthdays and vacations we actually take. Some days I still cry in the shower for the girl who stayed too long, but I always thank her for carrying me far enough to meet the woman who finally left. If you are reading this with a suitcase under your heart, I am lighting a window for you, and I will keep it lit until you find the door with your own name. I am not what happened to me. I am the architect of what happens next, and the house is already warm, and the table is set, and your chair is waiting. This is my testimony and my map and my key, and I am walking forward in shoes that glitter with dust from all the roads I refuse to stop calling mine.